Welcome back. Today, we're tackling a topic that's really generating a lot of heat lately.
Oh, yeah.
Childhood gender dysphoria. We're going to try to unpack this
Yeah.
with the help of Dr. Miriam Grossman, a child psychiatrist who's been working with young people for decades.
Really interesting.
Her book, Lost in Transnation,
Right.
really takes a critical look at this,
Yes.
contrasting her approach with the increasingly popular gender-affirming care model. And if you want to explore further, there is a link to the book in the description.
Sounds good. It's crucial to understand that Dr. Grossman's approach centers on thoroughly exploring
Right.
what's actually causing the dysphoria in each individual child.
Yeah.
This differs significantly from the affirmation model,
Right.
which pushes for immediate social and medical transition
Right.
based solely on how a child self-identifies.
The book doesn't shy away from challenging that model.
Exactly.
It presents a compelling case against what Dr. Grossman calls the articles of faith
Right.
surrounding gender identity.
Exactly. These are the unquestioned beliefs driving the gender-affirming care model. Okay.
Ideas like gender identity being innate
Yeah.
and unchangeable sex being assigned at birth,
Okay.
and transitioning being the only way for gender dysphoric individuals to find happiness.
Yeah.
Dr. Grossman uses her extensive experience and research to challenge each of these throughout the book.
So let's break this down.
Okay.
The book starts with a powerful story,
Yes.
the tragic case of David Reimer.
Right.
This is meant to illustrate the flaws
Yeah.
in early theories about gender identity,
Okay.
particularly those put forth by Dr. John Money.
The Reimer case is a heartbreaking example
Yes.
of what happens when ideology trumps scientific evidence
Right.
and the well-being of the patient.
And the patient.
Dr. Money's theory was that gender identity is completely malleable,
Wow.
shaped entirely by nurture, not nature.
Okay.
He used the Reimer case in an attempt to prove this.
And he was tragically wrong. The
Absolutely.
experiment not only failed,
Right?
it had devastating consequences for David and his family. Absolutely. David, who was born male, was raised as a girl following a botched circumcision.
Wow.
Despite years of therapy
Hmm.
and efforts to reinforce a female identity,
Okay.
David always felt male.
Yeah.
He eventually transitioned back to living as a man.
Okay.
But the trauma from this experiment
Oh, boy.
deeply affected him, ultimately leading to his suicide.
This case serves as a stark reminder
Yes.
of the lasting damage that can be done when we blindly accept theories without critically evaluating them, especially when dealing with something as fundamental
Right.
as a person's identity.
And it's striking that Money's theories, even after being debunked,
Yeah.
continued to hold sway in the field, shaping how we think about gender and ultimately paving the way for the gender-affirming care model.
That's a good transition to our next point.
Yeah.
The history and evolution of gender identity theories.
Right.
Dr. Grossman discusses how monies work,
Yeah.
along with the work of Alfred Kinsey and the Kinsey Institute, popularized the concept of gender as something separate from biological sex.
Yes. The idea took root that sex is fluid,
Wow.
assigned at birth,
Uh-huh.
and distinct from one's inner sense of gender.
Yeah.
This idea became increasingly influential.
Uh-huh.
Organizations like CAESU, the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States,
Right.
played a role in spreading these ideas, especially among children.
And here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Dr. Grossman points out a gap
Right.
that existed for years
Mm.
between the activist literature promoting these ideas
Uh-huh.
and the more cautious stance held by many pediatricians and psychiatrists.
Okay.
She cites textbooks
Yeah.
from the early 2000s
Mhm.
that still emphasize the binary nature of sex
Right.
and the stability of gender identity in young children.
That's a crucial point.
Right.
While activist groups were pushing a very specific narrative about gender,
Yeah.
the medical and mental health communities were, for the most part,
Ah.
still grounded in a more traditional understanding of sex and gender. However, that would soon change.
So let's talk about that shift. The rise of gender-affirming care and its potential pitfalls.
Okay.
Dr. Grossman explains how the American Psychiatric Association's approach changed significantly
Yeah.
when they released the DSM-5 in 2013.
Yes.
Gender identity disorder was replaced with gender dysphoria in the DSM-5.
Right.
This was partly driven by a desire to destigmatize transgender individuals.
Okay.
It shifted the focus from identity to distress.
Yeah.
meaning a person's gender identity wasn't considered a disorder in itself,
Right.
but rather the distress they experienced as a result of it. This
Mhm.
seems like a positive change on the surface,
Right.
removing the stigma associated with being transgender.
Yeah.
But Dr. Grossman highlights concerns
Uh-huh.
raised by some psychiatrists
Okay.
about the potential consequences of this shift.
Absolutely. Dr. Alan Francis, who was involved in creating the DSM-IV,
Right.
expressed worry that this change could lead to overdiagnosis
Oh, wow.
and unnecessary medical interventions. Yeah.
He argued that the DSM-5 didn't adequately differentiate
Right.
between normal exploration of gender identity in childhood
Okay.
and true gender dysphoria.
This is really important for parents and educators to be aware of.
Right.
It's not just about accepting and affirming a child's gender identity anymore. There's a need for careful evaluation
Yeah.
and a deeper understanding of
Right.
what's driving the child's distress.
And this leads us to another key point Dr. Grossman brings up, the work of Dr. Lisa Lippman and her research on rapid onset gender dysphoria, ROGD.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah,
We've talked about the history of gender identity theories,
right.
the shift to gender-affirming care, and the emergence of ROGD.
Okay.
So what does this all mean? It means the landscape has shifted drastically.
Yeah.
The medical and mental health communities are now largely on board with
Right.
the gender-affirming care model, but there are serious concerns being raised.
Especially about the lack of evidence, the potential for harm,
Right.
and the silencing of dissenting voices.
What's fascinating here is that while the US and Canada have embraced this model,
Right.
other countries like Sweden, Finland, and the UK have taken a much more cautious approach, restricting or even banning medical interventions for minors.
Okay.
They're calling for more research, more careful evaluation,
Right.
and a focus on psychotherapy first.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the history of gender identity theories,
Right.
the shift to gender-affirming care,
Okay.
and the emergence of ROGD.
Yeah.
Now, let's dive into some of the more specific concerns
Okay.
surrounding this model.
Right.
One of the biggest ones Dr. Grossman highlights
Yeah.
is the lack of robust scientific evidence supporting its effectiveness and long-term safety, especially for minors.
That's crucial. The evidence base for gender-affirming care, particularly for young people, is surprisingly weak. The often cited Dutch studies, which are frequently used to support medical transition, have significant limitations, particularly their small sample size.
Yeah.
And the fact that they focused on a very specific group of individuals who experience gender dysphoria from a very early age.
Okay.
They don't apply to the current surge in ROGD cases.
Dr. Grossman also cites a 2021 review by the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare,
Right.
which found very limited evidence for the benefits of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones.
That's right.
And this raises an important question.
Okay.
Why are we rushing to medicalize children when the evidence is so weak?
Yeah.
What are the potential consequences of these interventions?
Right.
Well, that's where Dr. Grossman really gets into the potential harms.
Okay.
She talks extensively about the risks associated with puberty blockers,
Yeah.
particularly their impact on brain development, bone density, and the possibility of locking children into a medicalized pathway.
It's important to remember that puberty is a critical period for brain development.
Right.
And interrupting that process with puberty blockers can have unintended consequences.
Okay.
We simply don't know the long-term effects
Oh, wow.
of these drugs on the developing brain.
Yeah.
And that's not even mentioning the potential physical risks,
Right.
like decreased bone density and infertility.
Dr. Grossman also discusses the serious and often irreversible side effects of cross-sex hormones. We're talking about infertility, cardiovascular problems, and increased risk of certain cancers, and a host of other potential complications.
Right.
She uses real-life examples,
Yeah.
like the case of Scott Nugent,
Okay.
a transgender man who experienced severe health problems after transitioning,
Right.
to illustrate these risks.
The point here is that we're not talking about minor,
Right.
easily reversible interventions.
Uh-huh.
These are powerful drugs and procedures that can have lifelong consequences.
Yeah.
And we're giving them to children
Wow.
who may not fully understand the risks
Okay.
and who may not even be experiencing true gender dysphoria.
And this lack of understanding is really concerning.
Yes.
Dr. Grossman talks about how many clinicians are failing to properly assess their patients, rushing to prescribe puberty blockers and hormones
Right.
without thoroughly exploring other potential causes of distress, like trauma, mental health issues, or social contagion.
People are being harmed by these practices.
Yeah.
And the medical and mental health communities have a responsibility to listen to these voices, to critically evaluate the evidence, and to prioritize the well-being of their patients above ideology.
It's important to acknowledge the distress these young people are experiencing.
Yes.
But Dr. Grossman argues that we're doing them a disservice by jumping to medical solutions without addressing the root causes of their pain.
That's a key takeaway. Gender dysphoria is often a symptom of other underlying issues. And addressing those issues rather than simply affirming a child's self-declared gender identity should be the priority.
And this brings us to the ethical and societal implications of unquestioning affirmation, a really critical part of Dr. Grossman's argument. She raises serious concerns about informed consent. Particularly when it comes to minors undergoing irreversible medical interventions. That's a huge issue. Can adolescents, whose brains are still developing and who are often under intense social pressure, truly understand the long-term consequences of these decisions? Dr. Grossman presents some pretty compelling arguments against it.
She highlights concerns about parental rights, too, and potential for conflict between parents and medical professionals when it comes to a child's gender identity. She shares some really heartbreaking stories of families torn apart by this issue, like the case of Hank, whose daughter was taken away by Child Protective Services because he refused to affirm her as male.
Those stories are hard to hear, but they're so important. Because they highlight the real-world consequences of this ideology and how it's playing out in families and communities.
Dr. Grossman connects this to a chilling trend of using Child Protective Services to coerce parents into affirming their child's chosen gender identity. Essentially labeling them as abusive or neglectful if they don't comply. She argues that this is a dangerous overreach of government power and a violation of parental rights.
It's scary to think that parents could lose custody of their children simply for disagreeing with a prevailing ideology.
And this brings us to the broader societal impact of unquestioning affirmation. Dr. Grossman explores concerns about the erasure of biological sex and the potential harm of teaching children that sex is fluid and assigned at birth. She argues that this contradicts basic biology and creates confusion and distress, especially for young people who are already struggling with their identity. Dr. Grossman also delves into the role of schools in promoting gender ideology. She critiques organizations like GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, for pushing a very specific agenda in schools, often without parental knowledge or consent. She uses examples like the GLSEN guidelines, which encourage schools to keep a student's gender identity confidential from parents, even allowing students to use opposite-sex bathrooms and locker rooms without parental notification.
This is where things get really controversial. Many parents are understandably upset that schools are making these decisions without their involvement. They feel like their rights are being violated, that their children are being indoctrinated into an ideology they don't agree with.
Dr. Grossman shares the experience of Heather's mother, who discovered that her daughter's school was affirming her male identity without her knowledge or consent. The school went so far as to change Heather's name and pronouns in their records. And even threatened to report the mother to Child Protective Services if she didn't comply.
It's alarming to see how deeply this ideology has infiltrated our educational system. And it raises serious questions about the role of schools, parental rights, and the well-being of children.
What's fascinating here is that Dr. Grossman doesn't just present a critique. She also offers an alternative approach. She advocates for a more cautious, individualized approach to working with gender dysphoric youth. One that focuses on careful exploration of the underlying causes of distress and the development of healthy coping mechanisms.
So it's not about dismissing or denying a child's feelings. It's about understanding them in a broader context and finding ways to help them cope with their distress without resorting to potentially harmful medical interventions.
Exactly. And she provides specific examples of patients,
Right.
like James and Sarah, whose stories illustrate the effectiveness of this approach.
Right.
James, who was struggling with his masculinity, came to realize that he had internalized negative stereotypes about men.
Okay.
And that his desire to transition was actually a way of escaping those stereotypes.
Wow.
Through therapy, he was able to come to terms with his biological sex.
Okay.
And develop a healthier understanding of masculinity.
And Sarah's story is equally compelling.
Yeah.
She was on the verge of transitioning.
Right.
Convinced that she was a boy trapped in a girl's body.
Okay.
But through therapy, she began to understand the role that her autism, social anxiety, and past trauma had played in shaping her gender identity.
Okay.
She eventually desisted, choosing to live as a female, and found happiness and fulfillment without medical intervention.
These stories are so important because they offer a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
They show that there are alternative paths, that not every child with gender dysphoria needs to transition, and that therapy can be incredibly effective in helping these young people find peace and acceptance.
One of the key takeaways from these stories, and from Dr. Grossman's book as a whole, is the importance of addressing co-occurring mental health issues.
Right.
Often, gender dysphoria isn't the primary problem.
Yeah.
It's a symptom of something else going on.
Okay.
Whether it's anxiety, depression, trauma, or a neurodevelopmental condition like autism.
And that's why it's so crucial to approach these cases with a holistic lens.
Yeah.
Looking at the whole child and their unique experiences rather than just focusing on their gender identity.
And I think that's really what Dr. Grossman is calling for.
Yeah.
A return to good clinical practice.
Right.
A more nuanced understanding of gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
And a recognition that there are alternative paths to healing and well-being.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, it's about protecting children, ensuring that they receive the care they need.
Right.
Based on evidence, compassion, and a deep respect for their individual journeys.
Dr. Grossman's book is just one perspective.
Yeah.
But it's a valuable one that raises important questions and challenges us to think critically about the prevailing narratives surrounding childhood gender dysphoria.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here and engaging in this important conversation. Remember to check out the show notes for links to Dr. Grossman's book and other resources. And until next time, stay curious and keep those critical thinking caps on.